Part 2 of Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn serves as a perfect microcosm of its fantastic story, whose central theme largely concerns the existential threat of the entire continent being engulfed by war, and the need for its leaders to strive for peace above all else. Elincia Riddell Crimea is one such leader. As the newly appointed Queen of Crimea, she claims to be completely and absolutely committed to avoiding war and needless bloodshed above all else. And this claim is quite directly put to the test in the second major arc of Radiant Dawn's story, in which she's tasked with stopping a violent, armed insurrection perpetrated by the very Crimean citizens she so dutifully claims to want to protect. So, with an active threat to her own position and power, will she be able to stay true to her word and peacefully put an end to the rebellion? How will she stack up to the likes of Micaiah? In this video, that's exactly what I'll be trying to answer in part 2 of my Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn Minimum Combats run, where I try to beat the entire game while embodying the very same pacifism espoused by Elincia and the story's many other prominent figures. You can find the recap for the Dawn Brigade's first arc, as well as a playlist with the full clears for every chapter we'll be covering today, in the video description below. With that all covered, let's jump right into it. I hope you enjoy. Despite the imminent massive rebellion that's about to take place, Part 2 actually starts off relatively tame for our lovely Queen of Crimea, although we can already start to see a growing discontent with her rule among some of the nation's many high-ranking nobles. After recognizing Peleus as the head of the newly freed Daean state, she immediately gets absolutely obliterated in the marketplace of ideas for choosing to show forgiveness to a nation that had invaded the country only 3 years prior. Which brings us to the prologue, which is essentially a defend map with a fun twist. After getting ruthlessly hounded by the entire Crimean aristocracy for her show of compassion, Elincia decides she needs to step out for a moment to get some air. And when I say that, I mean it quite literally. Haha, you get it? Do you get it? Unfortunately, her fun little excursion through the sky is quickly cut short when she discovers a squad of Benyon Draco Knights trying to kidnap Leanne, a heron and friend of Elincia's that they were hoping to sell for a nice profit back in Benyon. Despite the Draco Knights' monstrous intentions, Elincia still makes an honest attempt to defuse the situation peacefully, which, surprise surprise, doesn't end up working. I mean, they're literally in the business of trafficking and selling off Lagoos. I don't think asking nicely ever had a chance at working. However pure her intentions may have been, at this point it was still far too late to avoid an open confrontation. But that in no way means Elincia was about to give up on resolving things as peacefully as she could. And this is Radiant Dawn we're talking about, so you know it won't just be confined to the pre-chapter dialogue. It'll be reflected in the gameplay too. Into prologue, instead of, let's say, needing to rout every enemy on the map for no particular reason, we're simply tasked with stopping the Draco Knights from capturing Leanne for 8 turns. Now, ideally this would mean we could just run and hide from the enemies for all 8 turns and completely avoid fighting any of them, but there are a few complications that make doing so quite difficult. First and foremost, the map is disgustingly small and full of highly mobile enemy wyverns. Their AI is programmed so that different enemies will automatically start moving on specific turns, spaced out in such a way that completely avoiding them for all 8 turns poses some serious problems. Right from the start, there's an enemy sitting right next to us, and things immediately start to look pretty grim as I discover that no one on the team can one-round them. And it would only get worse as they, of course, instantly start chasing us down on the following enemy phase. Just as I began losing all hope, suddenly a familiar face appeared. In comes Har, one of the most infamous units in the entire game, perhaps even the entire series. For those unaware, Har is widely known for being one of the strongest and most dominant units in all of Radiant Dawn, from the moment he joins through the very end of the game. With a whopping 9 move, the ability to fly and take advantage of Teleus' insanely broken version of Kanto, and a comically absurd stat line, there are very few things that Har can't do. Now that such an insane powerhouse had entered the field, as a green unit I might add, all I had to do was sit back, hit end turn, and watch all the enemies that dared to approach Leanne fall before us. So, that just happened. I guess having a combat god as a green unit doesn't actually mean anything if they don't actually attack the enemy. As disappointing as this was, I wasn't quite ready to give up just yet. I mean, back in 1-7, I'd been just as devastated when I first saw that Tormod and friends wouldn't go out of their way to kill things for us, and that ended up being our first zero combat clear of the entire run. Maybe, just maybe, I could make something similar happen here, so long as I could find the right approach. And so, I went to work and began rigorously testing out different strategies. But the more testing I did, the more discouraged and hopeless I began to feel. I tried to see if getting him attacked by an enemy would make him start moving, which it did, but only to actively run away from the Draco Knights rather than fight them. I then tried to see if, even in this more flighty state, he could at least still counter and kill them on enemy phase. And again, I was met with nothing but disappointment. You see, in order to counter the Hand Axe Draco Knights at 2 range, he will go out of his way to equip a Javelin, but this has the unintended effect of making him slightly too weak to one-round them. I guess even gods have their limits, and seemingly I'd managed to find some of Har's. So ultimately, Har would prove all but completely useless when it came to killing enemy wyverns. Well, as a green unit, that is. Having finally accepted that a zero combat clear was out of the question, I instead shifted my focus towards seeing what I could get Har to do as a blue unit, to at least minimize the number of combats we did have to engage in. And I quickly came up with a winning strategy. Upon starting the map, we immediately run into our first major obstacle, that pesky old Draco Knight I mentioned earlier that starts right next to us. Now, if you remember back from part 1, a pretty common theme in a lot of the earlier maps was the challenge of working around unfortunate starting positions, where all of our units were force deployed near a bunch of enemies that only 1 or 2 of them could one-round. While that was only consistent throughout the earlier chapters in part 1, that isn't quite the case in part 2. Well, I guess it's technically still only an issue in the first few chapters, but part 2 is so ridiculously short that the majority of its chapters are the first few. In contrast to part 1, where this problem only really existed while we were still building up our army, part 2 features an ever-changing assemblage of units to control in every single map, and has no consistent player-controlled army to speak of. As a result, the opening strategy for almost every map will have to take our starting position into very careful consideration. With all that in mind, let's get back to 2 Prologue, where our starting position seems about as precarious as they come. Fortunately for us, however, it looks much worse than it actually is. You see, since Har shows up on turn 2, all we really have to do is avoid getting attacked by that initial Draco Knight for a single turn. Then Har can swoop in and secure that coveted one round that our other units just aren't capable of. Just as I thought I'd earned myself some much needed breathing room, 2 more Draco Knights immediately start moving into attack. With nowhere else to run, we're again left with no choice but to fight, so I feed both kills to Har. Another Draco Knight takes flight a couple turns later, and is similarly sacrificed on the altar of Radiant Dawn's combat god. With only a few turns left, the remaining Draco Knights, realizing how dumb it was to only approach Har 1 or 2 at a time, all start moving in a last-ditch effort to capture Leanne. But their unwavering tunnel vision on the Heron Royal would ultimately be their undoing, as we're able to use Leanne to initially bait them towards the top part of the map, and then whisk her away to the bottom left corner, which had been left wide open after we'd killed that first set of Draco Knights. And with that, the intruding Benyon soldiers were finally forced to give up and end their chase, which likewise marked an end to the fighting, and after engaging in a total of only 4 combats. Not quite the zero combat clear I was initially hoping for, but still one I was pretty happy with. Having successfully repelled the Benyon Draco Knights, Elincia proceeds to invite her Laguz friends back to the castle. Before doing so, she also makes a special point to warn them that there's been some growing unrest domestically, and explicitly says that she hopes that nothing bad will happen to disturb their visit with her. And I mean, come on Elincia, I'm the one who's supposed to do all the not-so-subtle foreshadowing here. Whatever. We then take a trip to the small village of Oma. Yes, that's its real name. No, I will not be making a D's nuts joke about it. Probably. Anyways, it's here in Oma that we're finally introduced to the big rebellion that's going to threaten to ruin all the peace and prosperity that Elincia had been so diligently working towards. We get the pleasure of overhearing a speech being given by some asshole named Yerdli, who starts spewing a bunch of nonsense about claiming what's theirs and fighting for the prosperity of the fatherland, all in the hopes of convincing the village's youth to take up arms against the queen. And, unsurprisingly, it works. They absolutely lap that shit up, and many enthusiastically agree to join the rebels' cause, which is where we come in. After trying to reason with them to no avail, our favorite Crimean country folk, Brahm and Nephany, suit up and get ready to put the misguided villagers back in their place. Which brings us to 2-1. Chapter 2-1 serves as a perfect example of Radiant Dawn's fantastic gameplay story integration. For better or for worse. Now, in the story, our overall goal in this chapter is to knock some sense into the other villagers and stop Yerdli from spewing any more of his inflammatory nonsense. Accordingly, our only requirement to beat the map is simply to defeat Yerdli, the chapter's boss. We're also explicitly told by Brahm to avoid fighting our fellow villagers whenever possible, a goal that's further incentivized by giving us more bonus experience at the end of the map for each one we don't kill. And finally, the enemy villagers themselves even appear to have their AI programmed to reflect the fact that they're just a bunch of disorganized villagers, and not a squad of formally trained soldiers. What exactly do I mean by this, you ask? Well, on top of already being pitifully weak in comparison to the far more organized and experienced soldiers that came along with Yerdli, they also behave quite erratically, deciding each turn if they'll actually move to attack you or not, seemingly at random. Whether or not this was deliberately designed to reflect their own hesitancy in choosing to join the rebellion and fighting their former friends, or just the devs again doing a bit of trolling through some absurd AI design, it appears that it's completely up to RNG whether or not some of them choose to attack you during any given enemy phase. While this may theoretically be an interesting attempt at gameplay story integration, it makes trying to plan out an entire strategy for the chapter in a challenge run extremely frustrating, even more so when the whole point of the run is to avoid fighting those very same enemies. Case in point, as soon as we start the map, we find ourselves in range of multiple random AI villagers, and immediately have to back off to move out of their attack range. While there are technically only a few non-villager armor knights standing between us and the boss, both Brahm and Nephany are still a bit too out of fighting shape to cleanly one-round them. Thankfully, there's another, less direct route to the boss that we could take by going south instead. As we approach the southern route, we're quickly confronted by another villager, although this one was much more determined to fight us than his less enthusiastic pals. Instead of waiting passively for us to enter his attack range, and then maybe choosing to attack us, this guy just immediately starts running at us. No hesitation. So it seems we have no choice but to fight and kill them. We can, at the very least, do it as painlessly as possible though, so I have Nephany quickly one-round him, and then have Brahm rescue her out of the attack range of the nearby random AI villagers. With the only aggressive villager now taken care of, it was time to set our sights on the next set of enemies standing in our way. Namely, this includes a mage, a priest, and a myrmidon blocking the southern route to the boss. Thankfully, we have a little trick up our sleeve to help deal with them. A rogue green unit that's only a few end turns away from arriving to save the day. Enter Heather, our savior. And by that, I mean another source of ridiculous AI behavior that we'd have to find a way to work around. Hooray. Much like the indecisive villagers, Heather's AI behavior seems to be pretty heavily influenced by RNG. In this case, Heather has a variety of different things she can do. On any given turn, she can choose to attack an enemy, steal an enemy's item, or run away to heal. Now, ideally, she always chooses to attack an enemy, not only because it means we can clear the map faster, but also because if she fails to finish off an enemy after countering them on enemy phase, that enemy will often go into heal AI and waste even more of our precious time. After watching Heather and a few enemies play an enthralling game of cat and mouse for a few turns, we finally have a clear path to the boss. As we near the boss, we're approached by one of Yeardley's lackeys, so once again, we're forced to take another combat. This actually ends up being beneficial though, since it allows Nephany to take some chip damage right before fighting the boss, which is actually pretty crucial for the upcoming boss kill. Much like Edward in the early chapters of Part 1, a transferless Nephany lacks the base stats to naturally one-round the boss, but just so happens to have Wrath. Now that I think about it, it's actually eerily similar to Edward in 1 Prologue in a lot of ways. Our boss killer sets up Wrath as they one-round everything on the way to the boss, and then kills the boss by landing a couple flashy crits over 2 rounds of combat. They'll even both share the same fate of inevitably being outclassed by a much stronger Wyvern Rider and get relegated to the annals of history, eventually being forgotten forever. Anyways, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's wrap things up for 2-1, which we're ultimately able to clear in only 4 combats after everything was said and done. And with that, we'd successfully rid the village of the scourge that was Yeardley and the harmful rhetoric he'd brought with him, and minimize the harm done to our fellow villagers along the way. After the battle, we learn that Ludwig, a member of the Crimean aristocracy, was the one secretly pulling the strings behind the growing rebel movement. Confronted with the prospect of all the death and destruction that would inevitably befall the people of Crimea if a rebellion ever took place, Elincia realizes she has to take action. Now, ideally they could just immediately arrest Ludwig and stop the rebellion dead in its tracks, but unfortunately they don't have any evidence that would give them the legal grounds to do so. Well, I mean, I guess they still could. Elincia is the queen after all, but this is Elincia we're talking about here. Extrajudiciously arresting supposed rebel leaders just isn't her style. But still, something had to be done. So Elincia ultimately decided to send Lucia over to Ludwig's estate to go dig up some evidence, an endeavor that would ultimately prove successful. In a cave near his estate, Lucia is able to find an official order relating to the rebellion signed by Ludwig himself that just so happened to be sitting out in the open, completely unguarded. Well, at least it was unguarded, until we actually try to leave and are immediately caught by Ludwig's men. And just like that, our peaceful fact-finding mission had transformed into yet another unavoidable battle, which brings us to 2-2. Chapter 2-2 is notable for being the first and only map in Part 2 that has a different win condition on easy mode compared to the harder difficulties, a change that makes things substantially better for us. On the harder difficulties, you win by having Lucia, who acts as our lord for the map, arrive at a seize point, which is being guarded by both the boss and a slew of promoted enemies, all of whom would prove exceedingly difficult, if not downright impossible, for our completely untrained army to one-round. Conversely, on easy mode, all we have to do is kill the boss. Simple as that. So instead of needing to kill the boss and fight the surrounding enemies while trying to reach the seize point, theoretically, the only enemy that we actually had to fight was the boss. On paper at least. So this seemingly small change to the chapter's win condition was absolutely massive in a run like this, resulting in what I think is easily one of the coolest strategies in the entire run up until this point. For whatever reason, most of the enemies on the map either don't move at all or only move when they can attack someone, so finding a way to maneuver around their attack ranges could go a really long way in avoiding any unnecessary combats. The easiest way to accomplish this was to take the northern path, which primarily features a series of stationary armor knights blocking some 1-tile-wide choke points. Now, this may sound pretty counterintuitive at first. I mean, wouldn't that mean we'd have to fight those very same armor knights? Well, as you'll soon see, our new roster of controllable units actually gives us a lot of really powerful movement tools that we could leverage to avoid fighting any of them as we escort our boss killer, Lucia, through the map. Upon starting the map, the first turn is pretty much entirely dedicated to setting things up so we can start making some big moves over the course of the next few turns. We start by having Elincia use a Laguz Stone to instantly transform into a Raven, and then position Heather 2 tiles above him, right below the first stationary armor knight. After Leanne dances for both of them, I have Elincia rescue her and carry her right around our new armored buddy. Thanks to her inherent access to the pass skill, Heather's then also able to squeeze past the armor knight, taking Leanne from Elincia and dropping her off in a position that would allow her to push forward and get a big dance off on turn 2 without having to expose her to any danger on the following enemy phase. And finally, Lucia waits just out of reach of the helpless armor knight, and then all the other force deployeds get shuttled out of their shitty starting positions into the nearby corner where they rightfully belong. On turn 2, Elincia rescues Lucia, gets danced again by Leanne, and then pushes as far forward as possible, passing by the second armor knight and stopping in a sweet spot that lay just out of reach of all the nearby stationary enemies. We are still unfortunately in range of a lone soldier that had started moving on turn 1, and are forced to take our first combat as Elincia easily tears through him on the following enemy phase. After that though, we were all in the clear and could finally make our move. Further capitalizing on his ability to fly past any and everything, Elincia is able to sneak right on over to the boss, dropping Lucia off in a spot where she'd be able to counter him from 2 range. With her Wind Edge equipped, all she had to do to end the map was land 1 of 2 crits on the boss when she countered him on enemy phase. Since the boss moves first, we were spared from fighting any of the nearby promoted enemies, meaning we could end the map in a total of only 2 combats. Honestly, not a bad showing for Lucia and company. Despite the enemy's flagrantly murderous intentions, we were able to keep overall casualties to an absolute minimum. Okay, technically 1 away from an absolute minimum, but close enough. After being presented with definitive proof of Ludwig's involvement with the rebellion, Elincia is still committed to searching for a peaceful, diplomatic resolution, and refuses to send Joffrey to arrest him. But that kind of attitude can only get you so far. After realizing he'd been duped, Ludwig wastes absolutely no time in assembling an army and officially declaring his intentions. And with that, all hope of ending things peacefully was gone in an instant. So, now that a diplomatic solution was off the table, Elincia had no choice but to make an important decision. Would she confront the rebellion head-on and prove that she was ready to make sacrifices in the name of long-term peace and stability? Or would she continue in vain to strive for a completely peaceful solution, betraying her naivete and indecisiveness as a leader? Well, am I glad to inform you that Elincia also wastes no time in sending Joffrey and the Crimean Royal Knights to arrest Ludwig, permitting the use of military force if necessary. Which brings us to Chapter 2-3, or as I like to call it, Ally Phase, the map. Wow, that was fucking terrible. Ally Phase, the map? What was I even thinking? Okay, you know what? Never mind, I'll just cut the whole thing from the video. Chapter 2-3 gives us pretty much everything we could ever ask for in a run like this, and they're all yellow units. In one of my favorite examples of Radiant Dawn's amazing gameplay story integration, on this map we aren't just commanding Joffrey and a few other familiar faces returning from Path of Radiance. No, in the story we're told that Joffrey's bringing along all the other Crimean Royal Knights. So when it comes time to play out the chapter itself, we are in fact commanding all the other Crimean Royal Knights. So, fortunately for us, this means we can plan around having a lot of yellow units at our disposal when coming up with a strategy for the map. Unfortunately for us, this also means that we have to plan around having a lot of yellow units at our disposal when coming up with a strategy for the map. Now you may be asking, what did I mean with the incoherent string of sentences I just said? Did I just have a stroke? No. No, I didn't. While on paper, having a bunch of yellow units at our disposal to fight things for us is pretty great when it comes to minimizing combats, it comes at the very steep cost of actually having to deal with the random and at times actively infuriating AI for every single one of them. Add to that the randomness involved in dealing with the massive army of red units as well, and any attempt at finding a reliable strategy starts to feel utterly impossible. But these are yellow units we're talking about, not green ones, so we can still exert some level of influence over their actions through the use of direct commands, although in practice this ends up being far less useful than you might initially expect. While we can get them to all explicitly target a specific square on the map, this only applies to their movements. They'll never actively choose to fight any enemies when acting under such a command. From the perspective of sparing as many enemies' lives as possible, this is actually a good thing. But in practice, we need the yellow units to act in their own best interest sometimes, so that they can actually survive long enough to get us to the seize point. The overall strategy I ultimately came up with basically boils down to carefully managing the delicate balance between alternating target and roam commands that'd be required to get our yellow pals to get us to the boss without losing too many of them along the way. Oh yeah, and a lot of mindless resetting to get the right RNG. Honestly, probably the worst, most infuriating amount of resetting I've had to do in a very long time. I mean, don't get me wrong, in previous chapters we've had plenty of instances where I had to reset for a certain random outcome, sure, but never to this level. Not only did it require an absurd amount of resets to get both the yellow and red armies to cooperate, but with each attempt I also had to spend an equally absurd amount of time just watching and waiting for all of them to move. Soldier after soldier after soldier, turn after turn after turn, reset after reset after reset. I really felt like I was losing my mind. But just as I could feel my last shred of sanity starting to slip, it happened. We broke through. With only a few surviving yellow units to spare, we finally had a clear path to the boss. Seeing my opportunity to finally be done with this godforsaken map, I wasted no time and quickly sent Kieran in to break down the door, one-rounded the boss, and seized, ending the map in only one combat. We couldn't quite secure the zero combat clear I'd initially hoped for, but after so much resetting, I was so ready to move on. But then, a bit later that day, a thought crossed my mind. What if we could get a zero combat clear? I mean, at first I just assumed the boss was far too strong for our generic yellow calves to ever kill. But I just couldn't shake the nagging feeling that maybe there was a way. After countless resets, I wanted nothing more than to finally put this map behind me and move on. But I just couldn't. Ultimately, I let the intrusive thoughts win, and decided to just go back and do the math real quick, hoping that I'd be able to just prove that the boss was either too strong or too dodgy for the yellow units to reasonably kill, and still be done with the map. But of course, that didn't end up happening. After returning to the last battle save I'd made before the boss, I stopped to let one of the few remaining yellow units take a swing at him, and my stomach dropped as I watched a weak little generic cav do a pretty respectable amount of damage to the boss. I mean, he did immediately get fucking obliterated by the boss on the counter, but he'd already done his job. While technically still theoretical, I now knew that achieving a zero combat clear was indeed possible, and that my time with this map was not over. It would take many more resets, both in order to reach the boss with enough yellow troops left to kill him, and then actually getting them to land all their attacks, but eventually, we came out on top. At the cost of numerous yellow units' lives, and many hours of my life that I'd never get back, we finally secured our second zero combat clear of the entire run. And then we actually entered the fort to arrest Ludwig, only to find out that it was all an elaborate setup, and that he'd already left for the capital with his main force of soldiers. So, yeah. Turns out it was a completely pointless mission from the very beginning. Fantastic. That's great. That's fine. I'm fine. I'm doing fine. After successfully luring the Crimean Royal Knights away from the capital, Ludwig continues to prove his strategic genius as he manages to completely outmaneuver Elincia, infiltrating Crimea's vast spy network, capturing Lucia, and storming the castle that Elincia had secretly fled to after realizing that staying in the capital was too unsafe. With the Crimean Royal Knights absent and nowhere left to run, Elincia is left with no choice but to take to the battlefield herself in a final showdown with Ludwig, which brings us to none other than the infamous 2 endgame, Elincia's Gambit. Elincia's Gambit is a defend map with a lot of moving parts. There are numerous choke points, destructible walls and doors, and an array of yellow units under our command. As a defend map, we technically aren't even required to kill any enemies in order to win, so when I first started looking at the map, I of course immediately set my sights on yet another zero combat clear. Since our army of yellow units primarily consisted of bulky generals and halberdiers, my main approach was to just get them to all crowd around Elincia, who was standing on the seize point, and completely shield her from combat until the map ended. However, for a variety of reasons, this strategy would ultimately prove to be wholly ineffective. First, it was actually pretty difficult to get the yellow units to protect Elincia for the entire duration of the map. If I tried forcing them to just stand in place after crowding around her, they'd usually just die, and if I tried periodically letting them move on their own before coming back to Elincia, they'd either die even faster, or leave Elincia vulnerable to being attacked, neither of which would work. And even if I did somehow find a way to get them to defend her for the full 15 turns, there was still another, arguably bigger problem that really killed any hopes I had for a zero combat clear. You see, after finding out that they'd been duped by Ludwig into leaving the capital unprotected, the Crimean Royal Knights quickly rushed back to defend their queen, and appeared just in time to join us partway through the map. While narratively this is a pretty cool moment, the tiny, cramped hallway that they spawn in made fighting the nearby enemies all but unavoidable. Sadly, my initial plan of simply bunkering down and running out the clock just wasn't meant to be, but this by no means meant that all hope was lost. Although a zero combat clear might have been off the table, we could at least still aim for the next best thing. For those unaware, in Radiant Dawn, you can end pretty much every defend map early by killing the boss, so if there was some way I could reach Ludwig without fighting any other enemies beforehand, I just might be able to get away with ending the map in a single combat. But I mean, how do I even get all the way over there safely? Ludwig starts all the way at the bottom of the map, with multiple levels of enemies further separating him from our main force. Well, that's where our yellow friends come in. Much like Elincia, these brave soldiers were more than willing to put their lives on the line if it meant ensuring a peaceful Crimea, and I would never rob them of such an honor. By having Elincia and Har rescue an allied halberdier and general, respectively, and then having Lian simultaneously refresh both of them, I was able to strategically drop them into very specific spots on turn 1. When enemy phase finally came around, our brave heroes attracted the attention of all the nearby enemies, and they quickly started getting swarmed. The general in the lower courtyard was a particularly attractive target for the rebel army, so much so that he was even able to goad Ludwig into rushing in to attack him. After having already tanked numerous hits earlier that enemy phase, our valiant hero quickly felt that at that point, the deed was already done, and their job was over. With Ludwig now out in the open and exposed, Har was able to swoop in and easily one-round him with a hammer, ending the map in only one combat. While we may have lost one of Crimea's most courageous soldiers during the fight, their death was not in vain, and the vital role they played in the decisive battle that ended the rebellion, with an astonishingly minimal number of casualties at that, would not soon be forgotten. And just like that, the rebellion was over. Or it would be if Ludwig didn't still have one last trick up his sleeve, one final bargaining chip: Lucia. Gathered outside the castle were the last of the rebels, ready to send Lucia to the gallows if Elincia didn't concede to all of Ludwig's demands. And once again, Elincia was met with a difficult choice that would pit her own interests against the overall good of the people. And once again, Elincia put Crimea first. Having made her decision, Elincia could then do nothing but watch as one of her closest friends was publicly executed. Or that would be the case, were it not for the appearance of Ike and the Grail mercenaries. Boom, another plot twist. Bet you didn't see that one coming, did ya? Oh, that's so bad. It's so fucking bad. Fuck me. Whatever, we'll just roll with it. The Grail mercenaries proceed to make short work of all the remaining rebels and easily rescue Lucia, definitively putting an end to the rebellion once and for all. And with that, Elincia had wrapped up her little arc, and Crimea was finally returned to a lasting peace. One that would go undisturbed for generations. So that's it. Happily ever after, no more plot twists. Okay, maybe a few more plot twists. I mean, come on, we still have 2 entire parts left to get through. See, I can still do foreshadowing. Take that, Elincia. Although, I guess if I explain it afterwards, it's not really foreshadowing anymore, is it? Whatever, this has been going on for far too fucking long. I don't know how I turned 5 chapters into another 40 goddamn minute video, but here we are. Anyways, I'm losing my mind a bit here. Let's just finish the video. Let's just round things off. Anyways, at least for now, Elincia had successfully proven just how committed she is to achieving a peaceful existence for everyone throughout all of Tellius. Woo! Surely the world will not be consumed by war. I'm fucking doing it again. Okay, conclusion, just go. So, with part 2 having officially concluded, let's take a quick look back at how we did combat-wise, and see how Elincia's peaceful efforts stacked up to those of Micaiah. Well, am I very pleased to say that we did an absolutely fantastic job. Throughout the entirety of part 2, we engaged in a grand total of only 11 combats, without a single route map in sight. Not a single one. Looking at each individual chapter, the final combat count often appears to have boiled down to how merciful the devs were when deciding on our starting positions, the enemy AI, and our access to yellow units. In 2 Prologue, we were forced to fend off and eventually run away from a squad of highly mobile Draco Knights on a tiny little map. In 2-1, we had to carefully maneuver our way out of a pretty tough starting position, but were still met with multiple unavoidable combats upon approaching the boss group. Then in 2-2, by carefully leveraging all the movement tech we had at our disposal, we were able to take down the boss while avoiding the vast majority of the enemies strewn throughout the map. In 2-3, the devs mercifully gave us a sizable army of yellow units to do all the combat for us, securing our second 0 combat clear of the entire run. And finally, in 2 Endgame, we were able to drop off a couple bulky yellow units in very strategic positions, such that we could bait out and kill the boss without fighting any other enemies. And now to answer the question we've all been waiting for. How did Elincia stack up to Micaiah? Despite Elincia's little arc having only about half the total number of chapters that Micaiah's did, she engaged in almost 1/10 of the total combats. To put it in other terms, Micaiah averaged about 3.5 times more combats per map than Elincia did. So yeah, I think our little peace-loving Queen of Crimea did a pretty good job. Now to be completely fair and balanced, Elincia's arc was a lot more centered around pursuing peace and avoiding bloodshed at all costs, and Micaiah was fighting the oppressive Benyon occupiers rather than her own countrymen, so I think it's a bit too early to pass down any final judgments just yet. Fortunately for us though, both will be making a return alongside the Grail mercenaries in part 3, as the whole of Tellius risks being engulfed in a massive war. A massive war that might just lead to the end of all life on the planet. With the looming threat of a conflict that could yield apocalyptic results if left unchecked, how well will our peerless leaders be able to stick to their peaceful aspirations? We'll just have to find out next time in part 3 of my Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn Minimum Combats run. I hope to see you there. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, seriously. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. So, you know, if you enjoyed the video and you want to see how things shake down in part 3, that'll be coming out at some point. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Anyways, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.